The wind moaned through the brittle grass that spread endlessly across the Arizona plains, a lonely sound that seemed to echo the emptiness inside Eli Carter's heart. The old rancher sat hunched on the porch, elbows on his knees, the brim of his hat casting a deep shadow over his weathered face. His hands were scarred and rough, cracked like the land he'd spent half his life trying to tame. The boards beneath him creaked as he shifted, but the house stayed silent otherwise. No laughter, no footsteps, no voice to answer when he spoke. 15 years had passed since his wife's fever took her in one cruel night, and a decade since word came that his son had died on some forgotten battlefield. Since then, he had lived like a ghost among the living. His only company, the wind, the horses, and the slow ticking of time. Each morning, Eli rose before the sun, fed the livestock, patched fences, and plowed fields that yielded less each year. He didn't speak much. Not to the ranch hands who sometimes stopped by to trade work for a meal, not to the townsfolk who nodded politely, but never lingered. The world had moved on without him, growing louder, meaner, and stranger. He'd buried too many people to care about the rest. One hot morning, the sun already high and merciless, Eli saddled his horse and rode into town for salt, nails, and coffee. The dusty street was busier than usual, wagons loaded with goods, miners with their faces blackened by soot, women clutching parasols, and a handful of soldiers fresh from patrol. A horse trader's wagon stood near the saloon, drawing a small crowd. Eli wouldn't have paid attention if not for the sharp crack of a whip and the murmur that followed. "Got the last of 'em here?" a man's rough voice shouted. Last Apache woman left from the southern raids. Strong one too, though she don't talk much. Eli stopped, his horse stamping nervously. His gaze drifted to the wagon. Inside, chained by the wrists, sat a woman. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands over her face, her skin burned from the sun, and her clothes, rags really, clung to her thin frame. Her eyes, though, were alive. Angry, defiant, unbroken, the crowd murmured. Some men laughed, others spat. "Savage," one said. "Ought to ship her east. Let folks see what's left of the redskins." Another added, "Ain't no use for her now the tribes are gone." Eli felt a cold weight in his chest. He'd fought against her people once, long ago when he was young, proud, and stupid enough to think the world was simple. He remembered the raids, the blood, the cries of women and children. The army had called it justice. But standing there, watching this woman chained and humiliated, it didn't feel like justice anymore. It felt like something dark, something that should have been buried with the war. The trader noticed him. "You there, old-timer," he called. "You look like you could use some company out on that lonely spread of yours. She can cook, clean, whatever you need. I'll make you a good price." Eli stared at him. "She ain't livestock," he said quietly. The trader chuckled. "She ain't much else, friend. You want her or not? $10 takes her off my hands. Cheaper than a mule and eats less, too." Eli looked at the woman again. Her eyes met his, fierce and unreadable. Something in that look cut through the years of silence inside him. He reached slowly into his coat, pulled out his worn leather pouch, and counted 10 silver dollars. "I'll take her," he said. The trader grinned, unhooking the chains and tossing the keys at Eli. "Your funeral?" "Old man." The crowd laughed as Eli helped the woman down. Her wrists were raw where the iron had bitten into her skin. When he offered her water, she hesitated, then drank without a word. They rode home in silence. The sky burned red with sunset by the time they reached the ranch. Eli led the horse to the barn, the woman following at a distance, her bare feet silent on the dry ground. When he opened the door to the house, he gestured toward the chair near the fire. "You can rest there," he said softly. She didn't move. Instead, she looked around, taking in the walls lined with old photographs, the rifle over the hearth, the pair of boots by the door, traces of a family long gone. Her expression didn't change. Eli sighed. "You got a name?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice rough from disuse, she whispered, "Nita." He nodded. "All right, Nita, I'm Eli." That night he made supper, beans, bread, coffee. He left a plate for her by the fire, but she didn't touch it. She sat outside instead, staring up at the stars, silent as stone. In the middle of the night, a storm rolled across the plains. Lightning flashed, thunder cracked, and the wind howled through the cracks in the shutters. Eli woke to the sound of the door creaking open. Nita stood there, soaked from the rain, trembling. Without a word, he handed her a blanket. She hesitated, then took it. She sat near the hearth, staring into the flames. After a while, she spoke. "White men killed my people," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Took the children. Burned the lodges." Eli's throat tightened. He looked into the fire, too. "White men took my family," he said quietly. "Different way." She turned her head slightly, studying him. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm raged outside, but inside, something softer took root, a fragile understanding born of shared loss. When morning came, Nita was already outside, gathering wood. She moved silently, gracefully, her hands sure. Eli didn't say anything. He just watched her for a while, then went back to work mending the corral fence. Days passed. She refused to come into the house except during storms. She cooked her own food over the fire outside and slept wrapped in a blanket near the barn. Eli didn't force her. He knew something about scars that never healed right. But slowly, things began to change. She started feeding the chickens, fixing a broken gate, helping with the horses. Eli never asked her to, she just did it. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, she stood by the corral and watched him work. He felt her eyes on him and turned. Their gazes met across the distance, neither angry nor afraid anymore. He tipped his hat. She gave the smallest nod in return. That night, when he set out supper, she came inside and sat by the table. She didn't speak, but she ate. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." Eli smiled faintly. "Ain't nothing." "Just beans." She looked up, her eyes steady. "No, you give me freedom. That is more." He didn't know what to say. He just nodded and stared into his coffee, feeling something warm stir in his chest, something he thought had died long ago. Outside, the wind swept across the fields, carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. For the first time in years, Eli Carter felt that maybe the world hadn't ended after all. Maybe, just maybe, something lost could still be found again. The night was too quiet. John Carver had known silence before, out on the plains after a gunfight when the smoke cleared and the world seemed to hold its breath, but this was different. This was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, the kind that made the hair on his neck stand up. The woman, Elena, he'd learned her name the night before, sat near the fire, staring into the flames with her hands clasped around the leather pouch she always wore. Her shoulder was healing, but her eyes told him she wasn't resting easy. Tommy was asleep in the loft, his soft breathing the only sound breaking the stillness. Outside, the coyotes had stopped their howling hours ago, and that more than anything set John's nerves on edge. He stood by the window, peering into the black stretch of desert beyond the cabin. "You expecting someone?" he asked quietly. Elena's gaze didn't move from the fire. "They find me," she said simply. "Always they find." He turned toward her, arms folded. "Who's they? You've been running since before I found you. What happened out there?" For a long while, she didn't answer. Then, in a voice that trembled more from memory than fear, she said, "I marry a white soldier, long ago before war finish. His name was Charles Whitfield." Her English came haltingly, but each word carried weight. "My people say I betray them. His people say I shame him, but he loved me. We run away. We live near mountains, quiet, until one night." Her hand tightened around the pouch. "They come, soldiers. They say he hide Apache woman. They kill him first, then burn our home." Her breath hitched. "I run. They call me murderer. Say I kill their men. Lie." John felt something in him twist. He'd seen enough of the world to know how quickly lies could spread, and how easily fear could turn men into monsters. She looked up then, meeting his eyes. "You believe me?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I believe you." A faint smile flickered at her lips, small and fragile. "Then you fool like him," she said softly. Before John could reply, a sound cut through the air, the faint rhythmic thunder of hooves. It was far off, but it was coming closer. His heart sank. He crossed to the window again, and under the moonlight he could see them, a cluster of riders moving through the dust, torches flickering like hungry eyes. 6, maybe 7. Elena was already on her feet, her face pale. "They come!" John grabbed his rifle from above the door. "You can't ride," he told her. "You'll tear that wound open." "If I stay, they kill you too," she said, her voice shaking now. "Maybe they'll ride on," he offered, though even he didn't believe it. She shook her head. "No, they smell blood. They follow like wolves." John glanced toward the loft where Tommy slept. He couldn't risk a fight here, not with his boy inside, but there was nowhere to run. The land was too open, the moon too bright. "Down in the cellar," he said quickly. "You and the boy, go." Elena hesitated, eyes wide. "You?" "I'll buy time," he said, already loading cartridges into the rifle. "Go." She nodded once, fear flashing in her eyes, and climbed the ladder to wake Tommy. When the boy saw the fear on her face, he didn't ask questions, just followed as she led him to the trap door under the table. John could hear the faint creak of the boards as it closed behind them. He stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding. The riders were close now, their torches throwing long, twisting shadows across the ground. The leader, a tall man with a black hat and a badge gleaming faintly in the firelight, pulled up his horse a few yards away. "Evening!" he called. "Sorry to bother you, mister. We're tracking someone, Apache woman, dangerous one. Killed 3 soldiers up near Fort Bowie." John kept his voice steady. "Ain't seen anyone like that." The man smiled, cold and humorless. "Funny thing is, we followed her trail right to your property." He leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowing. "You sure you ain't harboring anyone?" John felt the weight of the rifle in his hands. He could lie again, but the man's tone made it clear it wouldn't matter. "I said I ain't seen nobody," he repeated. The leader dismounted, boots crunching on the frozen dirt. "Mind if we take a look inside?" "Yeah," John said, his voice low now. "I do mind." The air hung heavy between them. Then one of the riders shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. John raised the rifle, quick and sure. "That's far enough," he said. "Now there's no need for that," the leader said, his voice smooth. "We're just doing our job." "And I'm doing mine," John replied. "Protecting what's mine." The leader's expression hardened. "You don't want to do this, farmer." But John didn't lower the gun. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't." The first shot came from one of the riders. The bullet tore into the porch beam beside John's head, splintering wood. He dropped to one knee and fired back. The crack of the rifle shattered the night. A rider fell from his horse screaming. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire flashing, horses rearing, the smell of smoke and blood thick in the air. Inside the cellar, Elena pressed Tommy against her chest, whispering in Apache to keep him calm. The sound of gunfire made the boy tremble, but she held him tighter, whispering the same lullaby she once sang to her son years ago, the one she'd buried with her husband. Above them, John fired until the rifle clicked empty. The leader called for a retreat, dragging his wounded men away into the darkness. When the dust settled, the world went still again. John's arm burned where a bullet had grazed him, but he was alive. He stood on the porch, breathing hard, watching the torches disappear into the hills. Then he went inside, closing the door behind him. The cabin was full of smoke and silence. He dropped the rifle on the table and knelt, lifting the trap door. Elena climbed out first, her hands shaking. "You hurt?" she asked. "Not bad," he said. "You?" She shook her head, then glanced toward the window. "They come back." "Maybe," John said, "but not tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. The firelight flickered across his face, and something inside her seemed to soften. "You risk your life," she said quietly. "Why?" John leaned back against the table, exhausted. "Because someone ought to," he said. "And maybe I'm just tired of letting the world chew up people that don't deserve it." For the first time since he'd met her, she smiled, just barely, but it was real. "You good man, John Carver," she said. "Too good for this land." He gave a tired laugh. Don't know about that. Before dawn, she packed her things. When John came downstairs, the door was open, the room empty except for the faint scent of smoke and the sound of the wind pushing through the pines. On the table next to the cold ashes lay her leather pouch. Inside was a small silver locket, engraved with 2 letters, C.W. He opened it and saw the faded portrait of a man in a soldier's uniform, smiling beside her younger self. Tommy appeared on the stairs, rubbing his eyes. She gone? He asked softly. John nodded. Looks that way. Will she be all right? He looked toward the horizon, where a faint line of hoofprints stretched into the dawn. I think she'll manage. Days passed. Life settled into its quiet rhythm again, though something had changed in the house. The air felt lighter somehow, like the wind had carried a bit of her spirit into the walls. Then one morning a letter arrived, delivered by a trader passing through. The handwriting was shaky, but careful. John, tell your boy thank you. I am safe now, far beyond their reach. I found a place that does not ask where I came from. You showed me not all white men carry hate. You gave me hope again. Maybe one day when the land forgets blood, I will bring flowers for your wife's grave. Elena. John read the letter twice, his hands rough and trembling. He folded it neatly and set it beside his wife's photograph on the mantel. For a long while, he just stood there, looking out across the desert where the sun was rising gold and slow. Ride safe. Elena, he murmured. The wind answered him, soft and steady, carrying the scent of dust and sage. Somewhere out there, he imagined her riding free beneath that endless sky, leaving her ghosts behind. And though he'd never see her again, he knew something in both of them had healed that winter night. The soldier's widow and the lonely farmer, bound not by blood or debt, but by one small act of kindness that changed them both forever.